Three, two, one. So I was thinking about it today, and we actually had this amazing topic kind of submitted by someone who I worked with this week on just for tickets and stuff like that at the job, and it was about kind of fears of a recession. I know, sounds kind
Yeah.
of weird, right? I feel like
Right.
I haven't thought of recession in ages, ever since
No.
the last recession that we had.
Right.
Um, but yeah, they were worried about if there's an impending recession. They said that they had read an article and saw some news reports that were saying that we're leading towards a recession, and so they kind of wanted to get our opinion or our thoughts on like kind of uh, how we deal with that. As they were a little bit older, so they kind of wanted to understand too from like a younger perspective and stuff like
Sure.
that. So,
Well, we were not, man, we were about half our age when that started, actually. And so we weren't in
hmm
a key consumer demographic the last time that
hmm
that happened, being the housing crisis in 08, 09.
yeah,
But yeah, no, it is interesting. I've heard a little bit of talk about this for the last couple of years, for a couple of reasons, actually. One of them, the factors that led into that housing crisis recession are actually, if anything, worse. There's another housing bubble that they're not telling you about, from what I've heard from certain areas. Okay,
mm-hmm.
I can't individually verify that, but
Yeah, because
uh,
I've heard a little different, but yeah.
okay, what have you heard?
So I've heard that a lot of people were saying, at least in that when it comes to the housing market, they were actually saying that they didn't feel like there was a housing bubble
Okay,
because they were thinking that essentially the problem with like the 2008 housing bubble when that burst, and the problem with that was there was already a huge amount of houses or real estate on like just available, and no one was there to buy it. And
oh,
so when it came to, and so that was a true budget, so it's essentially a supply outweighed demand, and so you had all of these houses, and for years houses had been like the perfect bet for Wall Street or whatever like that, because everybody has a house and everybody pays their mortgage. At least at that time, they thought everybody paid their mortgage. And so,
yeah,
yeah, you had like a lot of these um, really just bogus loans, not good loans tied together
sure.
in these bundles. And people were buying these bonds essentially that were securities of these loans, saying like, well, these loans are always going to be good. Everybody's going to pay their house. Um,
Right.
And so when people started defaulting on their loans because they were having other financial issues or whatever like that, um, a lot of those bonds and stocks and stuff like that burst and
Oh,
just really caused a lot of issues, as well as the huge amount of inventory that was still on, that was still available. It kind of made it to where real estate was not as secure as it once was, and so that kind of led towards the downfall, because you have to remember that these really secure bonds, not just people were investing in those, but like corporations and banks,
yeah,
because
right.
they thought they were secure, they were perfect,
Mhm.
they're
Sure.
unfallible. So,
Well, yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, that's good information to have, good background. One thing that we are going to do with this episode is learn together why people are fearful of a recession and what our thoughts on this. What could cause another recession, right? Um,
mhm.
we're already, strapped for cash with inflation, with gas prices, everything. Um, and people are angry about it, right?
Yep.
Well, so we'll touch on that, but a survey of 4,000 people shows that 81% of them, so 81% of Americans, believe the U.S. will experience a recession this year. Why is that? That's according to CNBC. Where does
Mhm.
that come from? Where does that fear come from? And what does that mean for us? one of the things people are angry about. You saw this past week Joe Biden bring in Barack Obama into the White House and speak, right? And they had a little fun and it was
Hmm.
lighthearted. It was cool to watch, but that's because poll numbers are down a lot and people
Yeah.
are very dissatisfied. And look, like it's unfortunate because people don't understand that it takes years to see the ripple effects of economic decisions being made, and then obviously a lot of like gas prices, for example, are due to what's going on in Ukraine. Not a lot of, but part of. Um, and so, you have all these other factors, but people just really all they see is how this affects their wallet. Um, and so, that's what they're going to vote on. So you see people are frustrated about it. Now they're worried it could get even worse if we have a recession. We're talking layoffs. We're talking the value of the dollar is even less than it already is. So there's a lot to get into here,
Hmm.
a lot to touch on. So I say we go ahead and get into it. One. Before we jump into our topic today, I want to remind people of the best ways to support us. Really, there are three. One is to leave us a rating and review and subscribe if you like us. No matter where you're listening, you have those options. Let us know what you're thinking of the show and what you think of any of the topics that we're talking about, how we're doing. It will help us continue to grow. And it will also let the algorithm know that people are reacting to the show, which will help us out as well. The next best way is to join us on the live stream. We're live streaming right now every Thursday night is the schedule.
Okay.
We go live and we have these conversations with people in real time. It's an awesome way for us to get to catch up with you and have that discussion with a group of people, our viewers or listeners in real time. And you can kind of direct where the show goes with those conversations. So give us a like on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube. Just search our podcast title, you'll see the page pop up. And the other way is to, if you want to support us financially, go to our website, nosignalrocks.com or just hit the drop down box and find the Catch Up podcast. It's also linked wherever you're listening. There's a link to that. And
Hmm.
you'll find all of our audio, all of our video, all of our merch and apparel. We got hats, beanies, hoodies, t shirts, phone cases, and mugs.
Yep.
Um, and all that's a great way because you get something out of it as well. So those are the three best ways to support us. Thank you for listening. So let's get into this topic, man. Again, a study by CNBC shows that 81% of people are afraid that the US will experience a recession this year. We're already, over a third of the way through the year. And
Yeah.
people are like, oh man, there's still time, right?
Hmm.
So I want to go through and let's find out why. Okay. So again, this was 4,000 adults. This was taken from March 23rd to 24th, so not that long ago. Certain groups are anticipating a potential economic downturn more than others, though. So Republicans are more likely to think there will be a recession than Democrats. We're so divided these days. I would imagine that's because there's a Democrat in the president's office, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But even still, those numbers are still high. So here's what we're looking at here. 91% of Republicans in this survey
Mm.
are worried about recession,
Hmm.
but 73% of Democrats are as well. That's still really high, right?
Yeah, that is.
So, of course, this makes sense. Those under more financial stress, 88% of them are worried about a recession. Those under less financial stress, though, 73% of them still worried about it.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it really, obviously that makes sense. If you have money to fall back on, you're not going to be as worried about losing money or the
Yeah.
value of a dollar. But still, those numbers are still high, right? So
Yeah.
technically, the last recorded recession took place in 2020, right?
Hmm.
So,
Well, I well, I mean, technically, it wasn't a recession though. I mean, it was close to it, but it wasn't.
well,
like a full-on recession, was it?
This is according to the official economic arbiter, which
Mm.
I don't know. Yeah, it sounds like a position of authority, right? So it's quoted in this CNBC article here. Um,
Okay.
yeah, so talk about the reasons why that happened, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was COVID, our good friend COVID, who's still hanging around, even though
Oh,
we don't
buddy.
want
Right.
him.
Yeah, we told him to
um,
leave, but he won't.
yeah, but I think, it was kind of a big response to, because, a lot of that, because there was a big stock market downturn, which, a lot of the stock market is influenced by, you know, factors that are going on and stuff like that. And so when there's a lot of shutdowns and stuff like that, um, that reflected very poorly on the stock market. But just going outside of that, I mean, we all saw that, right? I
Oh yeah.
think everybody was really affected in some form or fashion to what happened with COVID, where when it comes to the job scene, right? It's a lot of companies shut down. A lot of companies had to do a bunch of layoffs or furloughs, um, and essentially the world kind of stopped, which was
Yeah.
uh, something that really hadn't happened before, at least not in um, recent years, really, right? I think the last time that something similar to this happened was way back when in like 1918, when the Spanish flu kind of got really
Yeah.
crazy and stuff like that.
Right. Right. So we had not seen it. No one alive, for the most part, had seen anything like that.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
yeah.
And so,
So
yeah,
yeah.
go ahead.
Right. Well, so yeah, the shutdowns led to layoffs, and there was nowhere to spend money to bring the economy back. This is what led to so many people, right, pushing for reopening, even though it wasn't fully safe. That's because the economy was not doing well. Um, but you know what? It's done really well since then. So wages have gone up for a lot of people because they have to,
Hmm.
because inflation.
Hmm.
Um, there's been huge spike in the job market, a huge increase there. So because of this, according to this research that's been done, economists are not too concerned about recession on the horizon. Okay,
Hmm.
um, but obviously there's other forces like the inflation. Okay, so we talked about this a couple weeks ago, and I think we need to talk about it some more. So the consumer price index surged 7.9% in February. That's the most in 40 years. So housing, food, energy, it all costs more.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and here's the possible impacts of this. And I want you to pick up where I leave off. But um, if prices continue to climb, okay. And here's the thing: like, we know this, we talked about this. Like, it's expected to. Inflation's not expected really to slow down for a while.
Yep.
Inflation never truly stops, but at the head spinning rate that it is, it's not expected to slow down anytime soon. So, um, that could cause people to pull back on spending, which could cause businesses to make less money, and they would halt
Hmm.
hiring. Uh, Interest rates could go up, right?
Yep.
Uh, and that will slow down the economy. That's the idea, is to, well, actually explain that. I don't really know that one too well. So why would that help? Why would that benefit, raising interest rates? Because in my mind, that's just going to cause us more money, right?
Well, it's a so the rise of interest rates are, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm not going to say that I'm an expert, but I'm going to say that if I'm not mistaken, it's a way to make sure that people like slow down on spending and help, like, I guess, stabilize, because I think the biggest problem, or the biggest thing that helped um the biggest thing that kind of helped the recovery from, like, the big shutdowns that happened in 2020 were the lowering of interest rates or keeping interest rates really low, because at that point it was easy to borrow money, right? Um, and so when it's easy to borrow money, people tend to spend more. And so when they spend more, that helps stimulate the economy. Well, it's not like they want to. Um, it's not like they want to lower or slow down the economy's growth or whatever like that because of the lower interest rates, but it's more along the lines as a way to curb inflation, because if less people are, if I'm not mistaken, the way the logic works is if less people are willing to take out as many loans, then that means there's less it's less likely for them, or really, I should really say, for businesses to require to inflate their prices, or um, inflate their prices to meet essentially the influx of new money, essentially, right?
Okay.
So um, it's a way to try to curb that inflation rate
Yeah.
by
Okay.
raising it.
Makes sense. Yeah. I mean, what do you think that that's a viable thing to do? Like, is that a worthwhile solution? Obviously, it was a temporary fix in the case of the height of the pandemic. So I don't know. Is that something you could see as a long-term solution?
Um, I it's interesting because I don't know, to be completely honest, because I think because the things that are happening now are also very similar to what happened in 2008. I mean, there was a higher increase, or there was a much higher increase in interest rate during that time, which also helped lead to less houses being purchase, because if you're going to purchase a house, if you have to worry about a 5% interest rate for your home or for your mortgage, that's a lot of money that you're
Yeah.
now spending, um, just in interest. And so that kind of slowed the demand of houses, because there was less people willing to buy at such a high interest rate. And I think we are starting to see some of those effects on our current housing market, but the problem is that we're still in a shortage. I think that's
Sure.
the weird parts about like what's going on now compared to like the 2008 recession, is that um, we have shortages. So the
Right.
demand is staying where it is. It's just the supply can't keep up, or it can't
Yeah.
keep up and get to a point. So I think I don't know. It's weird, because there's on one hand that says like, well, a lot of the factors that are happening that caused the 2008 recession are also happening now, but there also weren't shortages to help change the dynamic or whatever like that, because if your demand dies and your supply is high, that usually causes a lot of issues, and there's a possibility of like deflation happening and stuff like that, which isn't good for businesses,
No.
even though it sounds great for consumers, but it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
It's no, I get that. Yeah. Um,
so
no, there's a lot there. This is why I brought in the expert, right? we brought in the expert for this episode. Um, so let's see. I wanted to talk about this too. Let's see here. Um, the war in Ukraine. So we talked about this a while ago. I
mhm.
don't know if this is as much. I think it is. So the war in Ukraine is causing uncertainty with investors, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
so the weird thing about investing is people by the droves, right? We're talking about professional investors will panic, withdraw anytime something like this happens, right?
Yeah, the panic
And
sell.
what's that? Oh, panic sale. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, panic sell. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's because they want to have the actual hard cash on them in case stuff hits the fan, right? Which is that is what causes stuff to hit the fan because the economy takes a sharp drop as so many people pull money out of the stock exchange, right? Which is
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, it is. It is. And you know what's even more interesting is that when the and this is kind of a side note, but it still kind of feeds into the same. You want to know when the most investment or investing happens? It's usually when the stock market tanks a little bit or whenever it
Right.
hits that bottom part, because at that point, right, it's all about the whole the mantra of really the stock market, buy low, sell high.
Yep.
So at that point, a lot of investors will jump in and they'll start like when stuff plummets or whatever like that. We actually saw this in the 2008 housing crisis.
Yep.
Actually, a lot of those houses started to get um, bought up by corporations at that point.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, they came in and said, "Hey, well, we've got this extra cash." Like you said, they want to have that cash on hand because are setting themselves up in some ways, preparing for that next big buy-in, so that way
Sure.
they can ride those stocks up and stuff like that, and gross huge profits just because of something plummeted and it did recover. Now,
Yeah.
of course, they're being strategic on where they're pushing the money into, but uh, they usually put it in things that, it's usually right now they do the reshuffle, right? It's whenever they feel threatened, they do a reshuffle. They either sell a lot of their stocks or they reshuffle it into things that are going to stay valuable regardless of any sort of a issue or whatever like that. And then when they're ready, they pull out of whatever is, super stable and then dump into stuff that they believe is going to grow and continue.
Sure. Um, and yeah, I mean, these are the ebbs and flows of our stock market that's as old as time. And really, people are responsible for a lot of it. It's funny because we act like we don't know what causes the stock market to change, but really it's our actions too, that play a role in it.
Yeah.
And, and actually, if you really want to learn how that works, an interesting way to find that out is to invest in cryptocurrency. And I say that with the caveat that when I was doing it 4 years ago, it was still much more niche than it is now,
Hmm.
and it had already had one surge because crypto or Bitcoin skyrocketed. But even then, it was more niche. So you could have, a couple of thousand people. They called it pump and dumps, actually. Uh,
Hmm.
so they, would pump money into a small crypto that's, say, worth a third of a penny, right? But then they
Yep.
would bump it up to 5 cents, you know? Well, if you put thousands of dollars, that's a huge return on investment, right? A huge ROI.
Hmm.
And then
Exactly.
they people pull all the money out, they pull all the money that they made. They dump it, right? It comes crashing down. And so it
Hmm.
was easy for me to see that that's how this happens on a large institutional scale
Yeah.
in the world economy and our US economy. It really is fascinating. So again, so far, let's get back to the recession here.
Yeah.
Uh, the threat of or the concerns of economists, according to this research, they say not likely. Okay,
Yeah.
not likely this is going to happen. However, uh, here's the caveat with this. So, um, they say what to do now. It may be too early for Americans to prepare for a recession. They could take steps now to better their financial situation. That includes boosting emergency and retirement savings, as well as trimming budgets to keep spending down amid inflation that's likely to continue. Now, what's interesting to me about this is what we were just talking about, right? So, if you're holding on to that money, that in turn is what's causing a possible economic recession. Is if people stop spending money,
Yep.
small businesses that feed in the large businesses that feed in the corporations aren't making as much money because people are holding on to it more. The idea, it's so counterintuitive, But
Yeah.
by preparing, and really this article is counterintuitive too, because it's going against its own advice that we just quoted earlier. But by people preparing for a recession by holding on to their money, that would inherently, if hundreds of or thousands, hundreds of thousands of people did that, that would lead to a recession.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So what do you do? Well, first of all, before we get into that, the question we were posed by the person who submitted this topic is, what do we think about it, right? What do we think
Hmm.
about possible recession and everything? So, what do you think about it, man?
Yeah. Yeah. No. So I think I do think, and this is just coming off of just a lot of stuff that I have been reading and listening to and stuff like that. Um, that I do think that we are in some way going to be led, or we are on the brink of, or at least we're getting close to a recession. Um, don't know when that's going to happen, but um, I do feel like that. And the main basis of that is
Okay.
a couple of different factors, right? It's of course inflation, which is not super great. The higher interest rates, the war in Ukraine, and mainly what I mean by that is the sanctions that are happening to Russia,
Sure.
because the I was watching actually an economist YouTube channel where he was talking about essentially what we're doing with these sanctions, which they do help. I'm not saying that they don't,
Of
but
course.
they're one of those where we all kind of suffer when those sanctions go on. But it's a hope. We do it essentially in the hopes of speeding up the process of stopping the war, right? It's
Yeah.
They're not supposed to be long term, but I guess the thing and the fear that I get is that if they do become a long term thing, what are the negative effects that that can have on the economy? And I feel like a lot of where I mean, we kind of already saw that with the oil, right? Russian oil and the issues that we had there. That's when our gas prices kind of really skyrocketed and stuff like that. Um, but there's a couple of other things like we I think we talked about this as well during when we were talking about inflation, but we were talking about the wheat, like
Mm.
the Ukraine and Russia, weird enough, but they're like the bread basket of the world because they supply a
Of,
huge amount of wheat,
of Europe for sure.
or of
Yeah.
Europe, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that those will be issues that we'll have to face. And so I think just a lot of the factors that kind of come and stem from that just kind of makes me um a little afraid of like what happens, because a lot of times it's stuff like this takes a while, but when it hits, and it's just like
Sure.
a big deal, like very similar to like the 2008 recession. There were signs of that in like 2006, 2007, but it didn't actually hit until 2008, and it just kind of like bombed. So
Right. Definitely. Well, I think from what it sounds like with your reasoning, um, it sounds like that people would maybe be more likely, people in Europe would be more likely to suffer from a regional recession there than perhaps we are here, right? They rely on those resources, that oil, that food, much more than we do. Um,
tr- true, but the problem is that we're a global economy. Like when the 2008 recession happened, it was here, right? It was mainly here, at least that was the first part of it, but it slowly trickled its way throughout the world, um,
sure. We
and
are
essentially caused a global recession.
It did. We are a huge, buyer and seller around the world for sure. Um, yeah, but no, I get what you're saying though. you never know how these things are going to impact each other. And we are a global economy more even now than we were then, anytime. Remember, we had part of that, if I remember right, that recession that happened during the pandemic was due to or fueled largely by a recession in China, you know,
Mm.
um,
Mhm.
and the other parts of the world. So it was a compounding effect, kind of what you were saying.
Yeah,
So
yeah, a lot of shutdowns in China due to COVID
yeah,
caused slowing in production, which caused shortages, which also kind of the reason why we're still in shortages or we still have shortages today. So, you
yeah,
know,
right. Well, and so for me, I would say I'm not really worried about it. Because I don't like to worry about things I can't control. But um, but beyond that, man, I think that there's so much unpredictability and volatility within the our stock market, and economists like to pretend they know, you know. But there's thousands of factors that are impacting where the stocks sit when they closed tonight. There's going to be 1,000 different factors that impact where they sit when the opening bell rings in the morning.
yeah.
Uh, and it's just weird that people try to predict this stuff. There are certain trends that happen. I will say that there are certain trends that happen, and because of that, I actually think that as long as the right people are in leadership positions
Mhm.
in our government, as far as economists go and things like that, Secretary of Commerce, etc. Then I don't think we're going to face the same risks, hopefully, that we did during the last recession, because steps were hopefully taking place to prevent those types of things from happening, right? And so,
Yeah.
of course, that's not to say it will never happen again. I'll tell you what I think would cause a recession is if Russia decides to invade a NATO country.
Yeah.
That's what I think would cause a recession. I think because we are on the precipice, but maintaining, right? And so to me, the main thing that would change it is if we as a country get involved in a war because of an attack on a NATO country. And, that just wouldn't be pretty for anybody. That to me
Mm.
is the main factor, right? And,
Yeah.
and, I'm sure I'm missing like 12, you know. Um, but yeah, I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, I do think um, that would be a factor, that that would kind of it could jumpstart essentially a recession because of just the amount of things that go on with that, right? If all of NATO jumps in at that point in time, and we all go into a big, essentially another world war, um, it'd
Yeah.
be, it'd be a big devastating thing to the economy. But at the same time, yeah, I don't know because now, of course, things are different than they were back then, but in World War II, the World War II was what got us out of the Depression, the Great Depression. If World War
Right.
II didn't happen, we would have still been in the Depression for a little bit longer. So,
Yeah. Well,
you know,
and that was largely based on us having to manufacture so much,
hmm
the government buying from this was, a really great initiative by the government to purchase from companies like Ford and others who got in and started producing these designs that government contractors had developed for aircraft and ships and all sorts, vehicles, all that kind of stuff.
yeah,
Um,
excuse me.
I think it would be a little different this time because a lot of those contracts are already supplied. The
Yeah.
war machine wasn't like it is now back then. So, you know, General Motors continues to make parts for tanks and, you know, v- uh, infantry transport and things like that. Um, so I don't know. I don't know, man. Uh, what that would do. I don't know if it'd be the same or not. But I do
Mhm.
think I remember the when we got in on the war on terror. I
Mm.
want to say that the economy dipped then. I don't remember. Um, I can't remember
Uh, I think it was, I think it in 2001 that did the economy did dip in that point in time.
for
Um,
sure.
but I think by the time that uh, we started, we actually like got into the war mode, I guess,
Yeah,
we were already uh, kind of recovered at that point.
sure. Sure, sure, sure. Yeah, with the World War II thing you were referencing, that was such this is why there are conspiracy theories, especially about World War II,
Mm.
because in theory, allowing that attack on the United States to happen is what obviously forced us to get into the war. We were coming out of the Depression, but um, I want to say the president and Winston Churchill were close, and the president knew he couldn't convince Congress to get involved. That war initiative boosted our manufacturing capabilities times a billion, and got helped us bring us out of the depression. It's really interesting. It's really
Mhm.
interesting what caused Japan to go the opposite direction and come and attack us.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah. So that is why there are those conspiracy theories for sure. But and you look not to go down this rabbit hole, but then you look at like 9/11, right?
Yeah.
Um, how is it that a plane is hijacked and I don't know what you're supposed to do in that situation. I have no idea. But man, look at what that did for our oil producing capabilities, right? By going
Yeah.
over into the Middle East and making ourselves firmly planted there.
Yeah.
So, um, anyway, it really is fascinating what we'll do for money. But, to get back on the topic here, I think the recession, potential recession, just remains to be seen. I don't know. What would you do though with this much riding on the line and definitely some grounds for concern? Absolutely. I'm not going to deny that. What would you do um, right now? What are your thoughts as far as maybe it's preparing? Maybe it's not caring. Maybe it's just staying up to date on research. Like, how would you handle this as a concerned young man?
Yeah. So, for me, I would for sure probably follow, kind of the guidance that we saw in the article where, you just kind of save a little bit more and just use that savings in a manner that will essentially prepare you, instead of having 3 months of, say, of savings, 3 months of, uh, gosh darn it, 3 months of savings, yes, of that will cover your bills and all the other good stuff like that. But instead of having that, maybe have like 6 months, or if you have 6 months, maybe have like a year. Um, but essentially, just extend that so that way you're prepared for whatever happens. And then, I think that's for the most part, that's kind of it. Just be prepared for whatever situation that you can be, and then whatever happens at that point. And at the same time, I also probably wouldn't move my money out of like main retirement stuff or anything like that, because we've already seen it, and it happens time and time again that um usually if your retirement fund, like say a 401k or whatever like that, dips or whatever like that, Whenever there's an economic downturn, of course it'll dip, but it'll always go back up, and it usually goes back
Sure.
up a lot stronger. Um,
Mhm.
than it was before. But I think, yeah, I think that would probably be my biggest thing that I would do. And then, of course, just, if I can, try not to make any super duper big purchases unless
Right.
I have cash on hand. I think the biggest thing for me would just be making sure that I am out of debt
That's exactly what I was about to bring up, man. Was,
because, or go
that
ahead.
way, well, in times of economic downturn, to keep the bank institutions alive, they come and collect their debt, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so if you haven't paid off that debt and you don't have the money, you would have to declare bankruptcy, you know?
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, being debt free would be probably one of the biggest things, is because there's, well, one, you own what you own. There's no possibility of you having stuff being repossessed.
Mhm.
And then at the same time, um, you actually it makes it to where there's less bills to worry about, right? Because if you have no debt, right, there's no credit card debt, there's no, I don't know, car debt or whatever like that, and say the only debt you have is your mortgage, then all you really have to do at that point is just you pay your mortgage, you pay your bills like your water, utility, your water, your electricity, say cable if you have cable, or whatever subscriptions you have, uh, and then and that's it, right? Because at that point you don't have to worry about paying off like your car, or you don't have to worry about whatever getting repossessed or whatever, because you're in a secure financial position.
Mhm. Sure. Sure, sure, sure. Yeah. No, I think that's all really important. And I completely agree. I mean, for me, yeah, it'd be cutting down on spending, which again, is counterintuitive. It's like, I think what it comes down to is spending, but only on the things that you really need. Right.
Yeah.
So, um,
And not
that,
overexerting yourself just to
yeah,
get certain things.
absolutely. And the biggest thing is paying off the debt.
Yeah.
Regardless of what happens with the economy or not, you're going to be better off for it. Your credit score is going to thank you. Um, and your whole financial well-being is going to be a lot better. Now that also includes car loans, right?
Hmm.
And these are reasons, people are like, oh, what's the big deal if I lease? What's the big deal if I, do a 7-year loan, right? Well, these are reasons why. You don't know what's going to happen in the world, and you can find yourself in a position where they require you to pay it off so they can stay afloat, which they reserve the right to do,
Hmm.
and you can't. So then they take the car back from you, or they take the
Yep.
home, whatever.
Exactly.
Um, so it's really, to me, the way to brace for a recession is the same way you would, prepare any financial wellness, if that makes any sense, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so, just try to be frugal and spend on what you only need, and pay off your debts, right? So
Yeah.
anyway, I think we had a good discussion on this. I'm glad for the person that sent this in. And remember,
Hmm.
if you guys are watching, please send in your topics to us. Leave them in the comments, or leave them in your rating and review. Direct message us. Of course, you can email us directly at the ketchupcast@gmail.com. That's the ketchupcast@gmail.com. So you got
Hmm.
several options there. Of course, we're live on Instagram. Well, we're not live on Instagram, but we are alive on Instagram.
Yeah.
Um, and you can direct message us over there or any of our social platforms. They're all linked in the description of the audio episode if you're listening to that.
Hmm.
Um, and let us know how we do. Leave us a rating and review. And, whatever topic is on your mind, whatever's trending in your world, whatever has you talking, let us know what that is, and we'll feature it on an upcoming episode. So, yeah, man, do you have any parting thoughts?
I think the only thoughts that I really have is just, I think we want to just make sure that we're in a good position, whether we go into a recession or not, because
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things is that um, it's easy to find out that if you are in a good financial position, like if, you know, if or when we go into like a recession or whatever like that, um, you have the possibility of using that situation to
Mm.
actually elevate your situation.
Yep. Which is
And
really
it's in,
true
yeah.
in life, right?
Yeah.
You can turn that negative downturn into positive growth for yourself. There's always a way to do that. You just have to have the right
Hmm.
mindset going into it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's right. Just be prepared to turn negative into a positive. That's what we all did the first couple months of the pandemic, right? And then we just got
Hmm.
tired of it. But yeah, so I think this was a good discussion. I really enjoyed it. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch up with you next week.